everybody. Matt Heller here, founder of Performance Optimist Consulting and the author of The Myth of Employee Burnout. Here with another excellent episode of 3 Questions. This is where I get to ask 3 questions of a guest, they get to ask 3 questions of me, and we just see where the conversation goes. We have no idea what those questions are going to be when we start, so all of our answers are unrehearsed and unprepared. Today, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Mike Windish to the call. Mike is the owner of Windish Music and Productions. They provide entertainment shows for theme parks and amusement parks and cruise lines, and I'm sure you've seen them all over if you're familiar with IAPA at all. Brass Ring Award winners, so I am super excited to have Mike on the call today. So, Mike, if you wouldn't mind just saying hello and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Great. My name is Mike Windish once again, and my company is called Windish Music Productions. We are a live entertainment production company that does a wide range of styles of entertainment, but we've been really well known for musicians, taking musicians and making them into a live performance as opposed to just atmosphere or just background music. They are a showcase performance and a lot more lively into a show. So I don't call them a band, I call them a cast. And my start has been with theme parks primarily. I was a touring musician for a while, and through my work with different theme parks and attractions, we've started to become known for that kind of activity. Mostly streetmosphere, stage bands, and then we've kind of worked into some cirque, acrobats, and juggling acts. And so it's become a real wide mix of entertainment, not just musicians.
Excellent, excellent. And you're also in cruise lines, is that correct?
Yes. Within the past, I'd say about 2 years, we've been working with Holland America Line luxury cruises. So right now we have a show that is called Billboard on Board, which is a partnership with Billboard magazine out of New York. And it is a dual piano experience, 2 pianists. Instead of just being a piano bar, it is a show, much like I was describing. So we try to find the best musicians, mostly in the U.S., and we go to all the major music cities. And so we are currently on 3 ships. That will expand to about 8 ships within the next 2 years. But our casting services do spread across other lines as well as other attractions when it comes to musicians. But right now, that was our kind of our foot in the door when to the cruise world.
Okay, excellent. Very good. So are you ready to jump into the questions?
Sure.
Right.
You first or me?
Well, you go first. How about that?
Okay. I'm going to start with sort of a personal, maybe it's personal, actually personal professional.
Okay.
I know we just talked about how you moved to North Carolina, outside of Asheville. And I have a couple, it's twofold. My first part of it is you moved from Orlando to Asheville, North Carolina. Do you find, I want to ask for work, for your professional life and everything you do for your business, what are the pluses and minuses of your move? And then the second part of that, like some of the challenges, some of the things that you found are really conducive to the work you do. And then the second part of that is personally, what do you find are some of the pluses and minuses personally for your family and your time now in a completely different state, different vibe, I'm sure. What are some of the great things you found from that area, and what are some of the challenges?
Well, it's interesting because I think some of those overlap personally and professionally. I would say that from a personal and professional standpoint, being in the mountains is incredible. My wife and I were very, very lucky to find a home that has a view of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and so actually just beyond the camera of the computer, I'm looking at the Blue Ridge Mountains. So that kind of peaceful, serene environment has been great for just overall living vibe, but also professionally because I have a little office set up in my house, which you can see kind of in the background, some of my amusement park signs and stuff from my career. But I'll go out onto our porch and just sit out there and just whatever you have a laptop, you can kind of work anywhere. So I can go out there and I can write a blog post, or I can be emailing, or things like that. And so that's been really great for a very, very relaxed type of atmosphere. One of the cons of working from home is that there's so many distractions, and you really have to be disciplined to stick with the work, because the TV's right over there, my drum set's downstairs. There's all these things. The mountains are right there to go for a hike. So there's all these things that could pull you away from actually working. So that's kind of that's just something you have to be conscious of and continue to work at and look at the view, but don't go into don't go into it if you've got a lot of work to do.
Right.
And just from a again from a kind of a professional standpoint, one of the things that we really tried to do when we moved here was make it so it would be conducive for my business. And I noticed that living in Orlando, even though my 99% of my business comes from a theme park, amusement park, zoo, aquarium, that kind of business, that most of it was coming from outside of Florida even. And
Hmm.
so as long as I was near an airport and I had an internet connection, I would be fine. And so when we first started looking, we did a circle around the Asheville airport of about 30 minutes. I didn't want to be any more than 30 minutes from the airport,
Hmm.
and happened to find a spot here. So for that, it's been great. Another little note on I don't think there's been any cons personally, except for of course the great friends that I left back in Florida, which a lot of us are still in touch. But we've made some great friends here, and the community that we moved into is mostly retired folks, which is fantastic. They've got a lot of knowledge, but they also like to do a lot of things. They go out and they're very active.
Yeah,
But
the great outdoors.
yeah, exactly. But they're also very helpful with handy things around the house that I don't really consider myself all that. I can do a couple things in terms of fixing things around the house, but major projects. It's great to have that experience. One guy is a contractor, another guy just he's out doing things all the time. So it's great to have that network of people around that are friendly. They're there to support you, and they can help you out with little projects here and there. So those are some big pros, I think, to the move.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I understand that. But, I live outside of Philadelphia, but I live in Westchester, Pennsylvania, which is a half hour from the airport.
Hmm.
A 20-minute train to the city, an hour and a half train from where I grew up, actually near Hershey, PA. And so I like the distance, but I like being close to the activity just enough to an arm's length. I
Yeah.
like the distance. And my office is 1 mile from my house. So I can't focus when I'm home. And I totally have to kind of get away and go somewhere that's completely streamlined to work. And then home is home. And that was hard for me. I did the same. I worked out of my house for quite some time. And that move to just having a space that's only dedicated to that helped me focus because I can get a little distracted.
Oh, absolutely. I think we all can. And one of the things that I found that has helped me is going to a coffee shop.
Mm.
And just plopping down, hanging out there for a day, and when I know I have a lot of computer work to do, that I can just kind of plow into, and that helps me keep my concentration there too. So I think for me, it's also and probably for you too. The work sometimes ebbs and flows.
Mm.
Where it's you've got a lot, and then you don't have as much maybe, and then it kind of goes in waves.
Easter family.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I find that when I'm feasting, when there's a lot of things going on, I'm super productive because I know that there's deadlines and I have to get things done. When I have a little bit more time, sometimes it's harder to concentrate. So I can definitely see you having a space dedicated to that, so you can have you can just concentrate when you're there.
Right. Right.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. All right, well, I've got one for you if you're ready.
Okay.
All
Yeah.
right, so I already mentioned that you've won some brass ring awards, and you talked about some of the shows that you do and the musicians that you bring on, and you create a show around them. And I want to talk to you a little bit about your process, if I could. Maybe not specifically how you build a show, but how you go from having an idea for the show to implementation. And really, kind of what I'd like you to talk a little bit about is, how do you get over the barriers or the roadblocks that come up? Because a lot of people, they'll start a project and then it'll just fizzle out.
Right.
So how do you go from an idea to an award-winning program, and what are the key elements of your success?
Yeah. I think on a broader scope, talking about approaching creativity and also business at the same time. A former mentor of mine said it once that, you got to be right-brained and left-brained. You can't just be focused on the creative and just have the end game of it being a wowing performance. You have to also think about every step of the way what goes into that. So you have to be analytical as well as creative. And if you don't live in both worlds equally, you will kind of stumble on the steps during the project. You'll either have an amazing performance that was misscheduled or just isn't performing on the right space or the right just doesn't line up with the deadlines and with the actual production that the pre-production. So that's like the bigger scope is trying to see everything at the same time, being inspired and hoping that you can keep that inspiration through every step. Because you have so many limitations. It could be budget. It could be, like I said, deadlines. Or the feast or famine. I've learned to really work well in the last minute. You know, if it weren't for the last minute, nothing would get done. Yeah. And many times I'm thrown a budget and an idea and a concept and everything is thrown on my table at the very last minute. And other times we have too much time to plan. So that may not answer the question just yet, but I'm always thinking cross-referencing the two, being really analytical and understanding how to meet all the deadlines and everything that needs to go into it technically, while also keeping that inspiration and that passion. So I guess it's tricky because when it comes to a client or a partner who wants a product, I can speak to the IAPA Brass Ring Awards the past couple years. I believe the first year, we did 3 years at the Brass Rings, just producing the show. And the very first year, I was only given the theme. I was given Imagine the Possibilities, 2013. And so they asked, this is our theme. How can you tie that in? What performance acts would work for that theme? So we had to think of the skills and the activity. We weren't really thinking of characters. We didn't have a storyboard involved at first. It wasn't like we want this to dovetail into the MC coming out and saying something. We didn't have really any technical elements to go off of other than the theme, Imagine the Possibilities. So we did go with a Cirque-style theme because we wanted people to stretch beyond expectation. We had an aerialist. We had, of course, you know me, sometimes drummers kind of fall into the fold. So we did have some drummers, and that was actually a suggestion from the committee. And we had a ringleader. We just made it very Cirque-styled and imaginative. And we had an original piece of music that was all about, I can't remember the name of the title. It really went with Imagine the Possibilities. And we had a great composer out of Philadelphia, Andrew Lipke, who has worked with the Philadelphia Orchestra, who tours in Get the Lead Out, one of the biggest Led Zeppelin touring acts. And he has an amazing studio. So he was just a one-man band for our production of the track. So that all came together based on just the theme. Very abstract, intangible, just what would you do with this title that is our theme for the entire expo. And then the following year, I believe it was Big Starts Here was their theme. Okay. And that actually was, we want a choir that just grows as the night goes on. And maybe there's some sort of thrill to it, like a flash mob where they're sitting in all the seats and eventually they get up and join. So the entire award ceremony had singers sitting in the seats as though they were guests. And then midpoint, they went up on stage and sang. And so, which was a little awkward, I think. Some people sitting in those seats were holding conversations. Where are you from? What are you doing? You know, what attraction are you a part of? And, you know, we had to kind of help script them with some ideas that made natural. And then they deceived the partner they were sitting with because that person got to know them for a moment. And then they actually were just a singer. And they were all Orlando performers. You know, we got them from the different parks in the area. So it's sort of, those are two examples of where it was one way versus the other. One was just, here's your theme, what would you do? The other one was, can you do this exact activity? Mm-hmm. And this is exactly the landmarks we'd like in the show, make it happen. Yeah. So what was nice about that both times was I was with the entertainment committee for IAPA, and we would just brainstorm together. And I like that best when I can talk to the client and get inside their heads a little bit, client or partner. In this case, we were producing together, so it wasn't really like a client situation. But I like getting in their heads and brainstorming so we can kind of all bring different ideas to the table, because no man is an island. I wouldn't say, I've got it, I'll see you guys in November, it'll be great. Yeah. I don't want to just reassure them and then miss anticipation or expectations. I would love to work with them together and then exceed those expectations, because they already have an idea what's coming in, but it's still, you know, wowed them in some way. So I kind of think it's really, there's no one answer to, and the awards too, if you're winning awards, I think it's more like trends or pattern. I mean, if some of our groups we have one group that won 3 awards for atmosphere. So I can say that I'm really proud of that group. That group kind of hits the mark. Others may win because of a certain trend or because other parks or attractions didn't really submit in that category. It could be based on just what's the hottest, newest, interesting thing, or it could be very subjective. So it's not easy to say. It's fun to say you're award winning, but it's the sophomore slump. After you do something well once,
Yeah.
you have to then exceed that through expectation as well.
Mm-hmm.
So even the Brass Ring Awards, if we produce that, and since we're talking about the attractions industry, we really tried every year for 3 years to exceed what they expected and bring something different we didn't do the year prior. And I think always doing something that hasn't been done before. If you have a list to check off in your project, try to do something that hasn't been done before for that project or ever. If it's never been done before, you can say, we're bringing this to the table, and we're all in this together. It's a risk, but it's exciting for all of us when we can pull it off.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when you talk about doing things that have never been done before, there's a certain comfort zone I think we all get into. When we do something new, or we do something that we don't have a lot of experience with, that I'm going to put myself out there as a risk, and I could fail, and that could be really scary. But I think kind of your first comments were really insightful in terms of, no matter what the project is, there's going to be sort of a there's got to be the needs of the the logistical needs, the times, the dates, here's the measurables, but then here's the creative part, here's the part that isn't here's the deliverable maybe to a client that's not the actual deadline, but here's the product of that. I don't know if I articulated that well, but in what you do and what anybody might do that has a project, I think thinking of both of those things is really, really critical. And I could see some people weighing too heavily on either one of those, and that making them not successful.
Oh, totally. And I say the partners we've worked with, or committees or clients. I do one-off events. I do 3-month residencies. We do just every kind of template. And I always find that the person I'm working for or with will have strength in one of those two categories, sometimes both. Mm-hmm. Sometimes in spades, they're just like beyond my understanding and comprehension, and I'm inspired by them completely, and they just help me along. Other times, if I see that there's strength in one or the other, creativity versus analytical or planning or structure, or they're really great planners, but they don't understand how to make the emotional impact on this for their guests, that's kind of where we try to counterbalance them. And that's, I think, with my team, with the guys and girls I work with, that I try to get them to multitask like I've learned to do. I try to fill the void of what's missing in this project. Yes, we're hitting all the goals and the deadlines, but what's the story we're telling at the end of the day? What are the song choices we have in the show? Mm-hmm. Who did we cast for this? Who's our lead? Who's our support? We sometimes find that was lacking because we were so efficient in other areas. And same thing with clients. So it's constant collaboration and a constant self-analytical process. It's hard because I think we sometimes get one of those things done and we high-five each other. Yeah, we're there. Okay, we cast this project. We have all the performers needed. Let's go. And then we relax and we take the weekend off. And I don't work that way because it is a 24-hour industry and a 24-hour kind of, and any entrepreneurial, endeavor is, but entertainment especially is, there's the hour you're on stage and there's the 23 you're living it. And so some of these guys punch the 9 to 5 and they got one part of the job done and then they didn't finish the other part. And sometimes they're really efficient at their job. And then we're missing the mark emotionally or, in the performance itself, in the creative end. And that's been the toughest, I think, for me, is to balance. I've learned that's what my part of my job is balancing that with every, project, with every partnership, and with every committee or group or my team. There's always seems to be a void on one end or the other, and that's not anyone's fault because sometimes I'm working with people who are in marketing, and they're extremely creative and they're extremely organized, but there's just that one piece that's why they brought us in. Because we take that off their table because they're worried about so many other things. And so, and sometimes we work with an entertainment team. Some attractions or even the cruise industry, they have the budget to have an entertainment staff who focuses only on entertainment. And so they live it every single moment of the day. And so they're much more critical about some of those minutiae, the really specific things that sometimes the guest isn't as concerned about. And then sometimes it's extremely warranted, like those details make it. And those details are really what makes them excellent. And so I kind of vibe off of the client or the partner and just see where they're at and how much detail they pay attention to and how much we have to bring to it for them or with them. And then vice versa, how much we need to really stay on top of it because they are paying attention to every detail, and we need to be aware of that too, because that's the only way, like if they're up here with their detailed, expectations, I want to exceed that. I want to, bring what they expect, but also take it to another level. And they're the ones who really grow the most because they know the right details, and they also help us grow into it. And I feel that with Holland America a lot. And with Hershey, I've worked with Hershey Park for over a decade now. I do feel like they look for the details. They know what they want. They know what their guests want. And they focus on a lot of times the right details and bring that to our attention. And so we're constantly working to improve. And since that constant feedback comes in, I love that because it makes us better.
Excellent. Wow, great insight. I'm gonna have to rewatch that to get all the little nuggets that you have in there. But I appreciate that. Excellent. So I'm ready for another one if you've got one.
No, let me look at my list. I was scribbling a bunch, and I watched some of your other interviews, so I didn't want to be as redundant. But well, I guess in your field of work, you're inspiring people. You're a performance optimist. You work in an HR realm, but you also I mean, you've probably worked with a number of teams and from all sorts of skill sets. So what has been the most challenging group of professionals? And you don't have to name them by company or by, literally, but like, is there a certain job, profession you worked with where this team of professionals was pretty challenging for you to motivate?
Yeah, there was one. That comes to mind right away, and I may have talked about it a little bit on another one, but what was interesting about this one was that they couldn't see that they were their own worst enemy. And that's a big part of what I try to get people to see is that, whether you call it motivation or engagement or, people's passion, that there are things that are going on internally that are either pushing you forward or they're holding you back. And I think there have been people that I've worked with that didn't notice that it was themselves that were holding them back as much. And there happened to be a group of people that were kind of like that all sort of, birds of a feather flock together. And so it was like this group of people that none of them could see that they were their own worst enemy, number one, and that they were the ones that are having a big issue on the rest of the team. So that became a challenge with them, and I don't think I've resolved that one to my satisfaction yet. You talked about exceeding expectations, and my expectation is that we're going to have a good resolution to whatever issue it was I was brought in to deal with, or motivating people or bringing people together, whatever it is, and that one I just don't feel has been resolved to my liking yet. But it's definitely a factor of the job that that the first time may not be the time that you get them, and you may not be able to break through as quickly with some groups as with others. I've been very fortunate to work with many companies over and over again. You mentioned working with Hershey for over a decade, and there's a couple of clients I have that I'm very fortunate to work with over and over again, and they're people that when you walk into that room, you can just tell that they're hungry for some knowledge. They kind of get it. They want you to be there. And I'm not saying this one client didn't want me to be there, but I just don't know that they were all ready to see what it was that I had to share and bring to them yet. So that's a big part of the challenge, is that I can say all kinds of different things. I can put up a PowerPoint, I can do a flip chart, I can do an activity, but ultimately at the end of the day, if people aren't ready to hear it, then that's what becomes very, very challenging to get that message to them. So I've got to get them ready to hear it first before I can have the kind of intervention that I'd like to have.
Right.
Yeah.
That
So
makes sense. I mean, it's the same thing in what I do with performers. They all come in with sort of the preconceived knowledge and expertise. And there's times where, this is how I do my show.
mhm.
This is, you hired me for what I can bring to the table. And other times we really need to mold them into something that is completely out of the ordinary because it's a show. It's something. There's a character to what they're doing. It's not just background wallflower music. So that I've dealt with individuals that were a little less, were not receiving it very well. But it's different. I think you work with a wider scope of people and larger groups many times, and so it's something I've learned from your book as well. Looking into how to motivate people and how to get them out of whatever their funk is. Get them to with the repetition, because these guys the same way. These performers they rinse and repeat, and they do the same job many times, while the guests only experience them once, but they do it thousands of times. So there's definitely a burnout that happens, and that's a constant issue, and on our end too, is motivating the team to be great performers.
yeah, and I think it's funny you mentioned the whole performer aspect of it because we know that I'm a drummer, you're a drummer, so we've had that connection, and we've talked about that in the past, and I honestly use that concept of a performance whenever I get up in front of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed it when I was at Universal, when there were people that were more schooled in the aspect of training and sort of the regimented form that training can take, and then there's me, who is a little bit more free form and more of a performance, and kind of running with things that way. But at the same time, there were times when even the seating of people would bug me. Like if they had people with their backs to the front of the the audience, or the front of the room where the performer was, the trainer was, that bugged me, because as a performer you want everybody looking this way, and it might be a little bit of an ego thing, but it's also, that's where I'm trying to control their attention, and I would
Mm-hmm.
imagine that's kind of what you do too. In any of your shows, you've got attention in different places, and you're moving people's heads, and you're getting people to experience different things at different times, and that's kind of
Yeah.
how I've approached some of my programs as well. So I take that
Yeah, I
from your
agree.
world.
It's definitely it's kind of the same. And I was a school teacher for years. I was a music teacher for 6 years with middle schoolers, and I always related to being a performer,
Mhm.
because you do the same lessons and you want to inspire and motivate them to take the skill that we're teaching, or the subject. But since I was a music teacher, it was a lot about appreciation.
Mhm.
So I always had the mindset of, I'm teaching life through music, and that may be a little kind of philosophical, but I knew that if they didn't really enjoy what we're doing or weren't engaged in what was happening, they would get nothing from it,
Right.
because it wasn't considered a core subject. Their parents weren't checking their music grade as quickly as they were their math or their science or their language arts. And this is middle school, so they're kind of in the brink of going on to high school. They're young teenagers, and we were able to, in that school district, very small school district, because the music faculty was great. We were able to have up to 450 kids in the marching band at the high school,
Wow.
which is almost half of the whole school in their marching band. And I would have kids playing guitar and drum set and world percussion and everything. And we were all about the numbers, that they would experience it. Everyone that was a part of this in this school district experienced it. They could play Brown Eyed Girl by the end of 8th grade. But if they didn't like it, that's okay. By the end of their, when they're adults, they can pick that instrument up and say, check this out, or they can have experienced it. Because if they never experience it and aren't engaged in some way, that music would not have any part of their life. Why are we even doing this activity or this class? And that kind of, maybe similar to you being a drummer, a musician, that really kind of is what I still do. I still try to perform for the masses and try to have as many people experience it as possible. So in like our performances, we think about the focus of the whole room. We do think about, even in our piano situation on Holland America, we walk through the room and pay attention to how everyone in the room, every guest is experiencing it. There's a casino across the way from our pianos, and we go into the casino and imagine these people who didn't even want to go see the piano bar or the piano performers are experiencing it too. So what's the context they're experiencing? What's the context people sitting in the front row versus, a mile away? it's always been a study, and it's constantly of people and their focus. And that's one of the things I think it helps us the most, is to really just pay attention to the audience when our performers are playing, not just the nuance of what they're doing, because sometimes I could harp on their musicality all day, but if the audience doesn't really get the punchline, what does it matter?
Right, right. And they could be, you say you could harp on their musicianship, but they could be playing something that is really, you can tell it's the passion coming out of their pores, kind of thing. It may not be musically perfect, but it might be, everybody in the audience is just glued to them, And so, I think it's great that you kind of walk around and look at how the audience is really being affected, at every point of the show.
Yeah, and when I say it doesn't matter, I mean the quality of musicianship is a given.
Yeah.
Like there has to be a high level, but I'd rather them play the simplest music at the highest level than the most difficult technical. I mean, it's like a conversation. I could use a lot of really big words right now to say what I mean, but I prefer to say the right ones in a short sentence to be clear and everyone gets what you're saying. And from being a speaker, I mean, I don't speak enough, but if I were, I would refine my speech so I could say the most uplifting thing in the fewest amount of words.
Right.
And so that's always a given. And I always tell our bands or our musicians, and we don't only work with musicians, we do bigger stage shows. But if the skill is really poor, if they're a band and they're playing music and it's at a B- level, and they tell a joke, a stupid joke, it's a stupid joke. People usually don't laugh or enjoy it because the joke itself wasn't strong enough. But if you say the same weak joke and your music or your skill happens to be amazing, you can play a Beyonce song in a bluegrass style. You can do anything in a funny manner, but if you do it at the highest level, it's hilarious. The same stupid joke is incredibly funny, and it has to do with timing, it has to do with the skill set that you're putting forth. So the simplest music or skill at the highest level is all I think that matters to an audience member, because it's what they'll understand. That guy's great. He's really cheesy, but he's an amazing musician. Rather than, oh man, they're awful and they're just not funny. These jokes aren't. There's like some sort of formula there. I think that if the skill set is really high, everything else falls in place. So I do think it's a given. The music's great. You just don't have to do too much to make it that great.
Well, I think along with that, there's the genuineness. I don't know if that's a word, but you wanted to use big words, so I'm going to use that. But when you see somebody, whether they're speaking or they're performing or they're reading poetry, you can tell when it's genuine. And I think that really translates to people and again draws them in. And I think that's what a lot of really great musicians do, is that they love what they do, and they can play Mary Had a Little Lamb, but it's going to be awesome. So
yeah, definitely.
Excellent. All right, I think it's my turn to ask you a question. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that you had been a touring musician and you toured with Chubby Checker, which was, I just think is uberly cool. But also it's funny because I went back through some of our LinkedIn conversations when we first met, and you also had mentioned that you got to sit in with like the Beach Boys and Bobby Rydell, and I know that you've met a lot of sort of celebrities and big names over the years, and I'm just curious, with people that have gotten to that sort of echelon of success and fame and that kind of thing, what kind of things have you learned from them, either positive or negative, that you've used in your life, in your music, in your business? What kind of things have you learned?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, people are people, so I think there's a lot of celebrities that are very eccentric because maybe from a young age they became very famous, or even in their 20s. A young age is relative, but if you became famous in your young age or in your teens or your adulthood of 20s, there's going to be some eccentricity later in your career. There just is, because a good portion of your life was spent, in front of a camera or in public, in the eye of the public. So anyone I've ever met that's a celebrity has a certain guard to them at times, because they've seen it all. They've been all over the world. They've had people ask them amazingly genuine questions and extremely rude questions. They've had people criticize their everything, every detail of their life. So I do tread lightly with like celebrities if I do meet them. And because I played with Chubby Checker, I certainly met a lot of celebrities or musicians from that era of music. Chubby was famous since he was 18. The Twist came out when he was 18. He recorded it in high school. And so he's lived. I think he's in his early mid 70s right now. Most people think he's much older, but he was a young artist back in the early 60s. So he's lived most of his life being, a number one, and also performed all his life. Some people don't know that he's still out there doing it real hard. And we're good friends. I don't play with him anymore, just because my wife and I started a family. So I just couldn't wait for the tour bus and for the schedule, and I just had to make my own schedule. And he's totally understanding of that. He's really gracious, and I learned a lot from him. But I've learned a lot, I think, from the gig itself, from traveling, and I ended up becoming his tour manager. My mentor in the band was a man named Tommy Clufetis, and he was the band leader, the tour manager, the sax player. He did everything, and so. Because he and Chubby are kind of like very strong personalities. I'm not afraid to say that too. He'll probably watch this, and they know what they want, and they want high quality at all times, and they will do anything to get that. So Tommy, who was my mentor in that band, actually was everything. He wore all the hats, and then when he was no longer with the group, I ended up inheriting all of that. So I ended up being his drummer, his tour manager, his music director, and tour managing some very interesting gigs around the world and all over the U.S. And so I learned a lot, I think, mostly from the travel and from organizing. Even though it was like 6 people I had to organize, 7 or 8 people with crew, I really learned a lot from that, and it was an extension of my teaching in middle school. Not that these guys are like middle schoolers, but it was an extension of working with people, and it was an extension of overseeing ensembles and shows in entertainment and live entertainment for some of the attractions. And now today, when I travel a lot for some of our cruise work, I have that same mentality I learned from Chubby and from the road of I look at everyone's passport. I want to see your passport. I know you're a responsible person. Let's all hold them out and look at them together. Do you make sure that I'm sort of still like on a field trip with my middle schoolers. I know they'll all spread out and they'll all come back at some point. It'll be fine, and they're very responsible people. But I learned from 16 to 60 years old, there's no difference in people. Some of them are extremely organized and A personalities. Some of them are all over the map. So I think I learned mostly from the organization of that. But we also played, when you said sit in, I definitely sat in with those bands, because I'm not the Beach Boys drummer, and I wasn't, even a sub for the gig. I was really good friends with the guys in the band, and so they had me sit in a couple times on "Help Me, Rhonda" and a few other songs. I even, met John Stamos through them, and he plays drums and guitar with them when he's on the road. And I met a lot of 80s, 90s heartthrobs. I don't know why. Luke Perry, him, a couple others. I always meet Bon Jovi. We did a show with him once. I can't claim to have played with him, but we hung out with him for a little bit. Yeah. So I've met a lot of these interesting people from other eras, but I learned a lot just from, I think, just people and figuring out how to organize in these interesting places. And the ships right now too, touring, playing great venues, and then also working on the ships is very difficult, because it's like working from home. You have a job to do, but you're in some of the most beautiful, amazing, once-in-a-lifetime places. So it can be very distracting when you're trying to focus. And it's a casual environment. You're with musicians, you're with artists and creative types and fans. So, but then the other part of that is sometimes I'm on a ship and I'm between 4 walls and I'm with 2 pianists, and the whole time for 12 days we are rehearsing. So you're not able to see those beautiful things, and so it's sometimes you don't get to enjoy the spoils of the work, and that's fine, because it's your own little cubicle just out in somewhere beautiful. So that challenge has been tough for me, and I think I've learned the most of how to focus through all the weirdness. Okay. I don't know if that answered the question.
Oh, it did. I mean, what I really took away from that a lot was about the relationships with people, and how, asking for a middle schooler's permission slip is like asking for a musician's passport, but there's the organization there. And, my wife will be very jealous because she's a huge Bon Jovi fan. So the fact that you got to meet and hang out with them a little bit is, that'll.
Yeah, we did one event. It was in New York. It was called the Songwriters Hall of Fame, which happens every year, and it was great. I mean, I met 20 of my heroes that night. Wow. And I love Bon Jovi's music, and I grew up with it. However, that wasn't my A-list, the guy I was willing to meet. But because I was handling Chubby and helping him with his everything backstage and whatever, we did go to all the VIP events, and to see some of these legends kind of hanging out without press and bothering them at all. I can't even think of a lot of the other artists that were there. Martina McBride was there. They did like a tribute to the Kinks, so they played a lot of their music. The entire Saturday Night Live band was there, and Sean Pelton, the drummer, is one of my heroes, so I got to talk to him. Bashiri Johnson, the percussionist for Michael Jackson, as well as Michael Bearden, the musical director on Michael Jackson's final tour that never happened,
Okay.
was working with us as well. So it was amazing, but it was a once in a lifetime, never happen again. And so it's not like your elevator speech that you're going to get on the bandstand with Bon Jovi or anything. But
right.
Every now and then you get those situations. You just you do need to stand back, but you also want to be a part of it. So you try to initiate conversation if you can, or let it go because the eccentricity can be too much.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's been an amazing ride, and now that my wife and I have family, we have a one son, and then we have another one on the way this November.
Woohoo! Congratulations.
So, yeah, thank you. I'll be on paternity leave. I will not be at the IAPA event. Yeah, it's for a long time. I've only been there for 5 years maybe, but I just really couldn't travel as much unless I could make my own schedule, and so I feel like I got a lot out of that experience.
Excellent. Well, I think you made that choice, for your family, and I think it was a good one, and the one you had to make. And my wife talks about that there's chapters in our lives, and you had that chapter as a touring drummer, and now you have a chapter as a dad, which is going to be a long chapter. But you've got those chapters, and sometimes you have to turn the page, and you just make those decisions.
Right. Cool. Do I owe you a question?
I think you do. And then I have one more for you after that.
Okay. Oh man. This is I scribbled it on a pad of paper. I don't even know what I said here, but I'm going to stumble through it here.
Okay.
What I find unique about your work is that you've built this business off of your passion and your organization. I kind of the right brain, left brain I talked about as a musician. You've built something tangible and marketable and very helpful to other businesses and other attractions based on your experience and passion. I see we have a parallel there because there's no blueprint for me as a musician. I had no plan to be a producer or to work in the theme park industry, or the things I do now were more of an extension, I think, of being a musician and a teacher than they were my dream to take over live entertainment. I wanted to be a drummer.
Yeah.
Maybe we share that too. All I want to do is play behind some amazing musicians. So at what point did you realize that these strengths you have and these experiences could become this business that you have and a flourishing amount of work? We talked about feast or famine, but anytime I'm looking you up or talking to you, you're out there doing it at a high level, and you're always full of energy. So what point did that happen for you, and what challenges did you find along the way?
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. I think the moments that I started noticing it actually came from IAPA, because when I was still at previous jobs, and certainly when I was working at Universal, I would speak at IAPA, and people would come up to me afterwards and they would say, do you do training outside of what you do at Universal? And it was always a little tricky because, I didn't want to have any conflict of interest with Universal or, that kind of thing. And, but I kept everybody's contact information that ever asked me that. One of the things that my wife and I talked a lot about is when it was time for me to kind of step out on my own, I had a lot of contacts, and we felt that was the right thing to do, to give it a try. We wanted to make sure that financially we were in a good spot. So one of the challenges certainly is the financial part, because you don't have this steady paycheck anymore from a reputable company. You don't have somebody taking care of health insurance. So now you have to go find your own health insurance. You have a much more complex tax situation, now, and you've got to do all that yourself. And we have a really good accountant, and we have some good financial folks, but that all now falls to you. So that's a big part of the challenge. But it was those moments when people started asking me if this was something I did that was really sort of the drive to say, well, maybe I could, maybe I could do this. And I just love the industry so much that as much as I loved working at Universal and all the other places that I worked, I think I knew eventually, once I realized that this was my path, that I wanted to support more than just one company. Again, I loved working at Universal, and I didn't leave there because I didn't love it. I was looking to get involved in the entire industry, and again, to be able to work with zoos and aquariums and theme parks and water parks and all the different aspects of our business, that really excited me. And so when I got out of Universal, first thing I did was I sent a note to everybody who'd ever asked me that question that I had a contact of, and I said, I'm out. I'm ready to go, you know. And from that, I got three things right away, and that just sort of snowballed. And I think what you said earlier is certainly about exceeding expectations. I absolutely try to do that, whether it's with a proposal that I'm doing with someone, whether it's somebody asks me a quick question on email, or a thing on social media or whatever it is. I try to. I don't look at everything as a billable expense like a lawyer might. I try to provide value wherever I can. So, for instance, I just reconnected with somebody that I knew from my Universal days on LinkedIn yesterday, and she was talking about the fact that she's in a good job now. She's left Universal to kind of going in a different way, and but maybe it's not her passion or where she wants to be. So we just had a quick kind of conversation, and she was telling me kind of about her thought process, and it just it was just sort of natural for me to say, well, have you thought about this? Have you looked at it this way? Have you done that kind of thing? And she's like, yeah, I think I have, but now this gives me more energy to kind of refocus on it. And I mean, just even those little things that I get the opportunity to help people, that's what drives it for me. So when you say that I've been out there at a high level, I sincerely appreciate that, and hope that I can continue to do it at a high level and even a higher level going forward. So I appreciate you mentioning that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the first time we met was at the IAPA Expo. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, and I went to your session, and I believe I think your book just came out.
Yep.
It was the subject of burnout, and I just remember some of the comparisons, and one of them happened to be a drummer. I think you talked about Def Leppard's drummer, and
Rick Allen. Yep.
Yep, and we chatted afterwards about that. Of course, the drumming,
right.
Was something that we shared. But that fascinated me just from that point even till now, because I always found it interesting. I think one thing also that's interested me in the arts is that how you can make a living, or how you can create, provide for your family or provide for yourself and others through this intangible. I mean, people ask me what I do, and I sometimes have trouble describing it. I either have too much to say or not enough, because it's really hard. It's just, and I met a TV producer who works with the Law and Order, with Dick Wolf and the Law and Order TV program, and I asked him, because we were trying to compare. Well, what do you do? And I had no idea how to describe it. And he said, well, I just do whatever it takes to get the job done. He said, if it means taking the shirt off my back and putting it on the actor because it's going to make the shoot better, I will do that. However, that wasn't in my job description, but whatever it takes. Sometimes I'll get behind the camera. Sometimes I'll be very hands off, And there's the only thing I could really relate to is just whatever it takes to get the job done. And I think over time you start to realize how to systemize it. And that's been my tricky part of that, is budgeting and systemizing entertainment is like an art in itself, figuring out how that works. So I've always been fascinated by people who can take something and build on that, and then also then share it across the masses, which is what I see a parallel with. Oh,
absolutely. Absolutely. And that was actually part of the reason I wanted to ask you about the question of, when you have an idea for a show or something, and then that becomes reality. That's exactly that whole thing of taking the intangible, taking an idea, taking a concept, and making it something that people can see or touch or smell, or, that kind of thing. And I find, you kind of asked about the struggles or challenges too. I find that continuing to do that, like you talked about the sophomore curse, continuing to do that is a challenge, because now I've got these ideas in my head and of ways to take my business to the next level. And some of them I've implemented, Some of them I haven't yet because I still yet can't see the path that will get me there.
Right.
Eventually I will, and I think I've learned enough about my process and my thought process that sometimes it takes getting away from something for a while, and then you come back at it with a fresh perspective. Or I can just be out walking in my neighborhood and boom, an idea hits that wouldn't have hit me if I was staring at my computer screen for 3 hours.
Yeah.
So I understand that about myself and how I work. So that helps that whole process there, I suppose. But yeah, good question. Excellent. You ready for your last one?
Yes.
All
Sure.
right, here we go. All right, so we've talked a lot about drumming. Obviously, we had to talk about drumming here.
Yes.
But I'm going to take that off the table for a second.
Wonderful.
So if you could be in a band or in a performing ensemble doing something other than drums, no percussion, no world percussion, no, nothing that you hit with a stick of your hands. What instrument would that be, and why? If you could perform at a high level in a band.
I would be a vocalist
Okay.
that plays piano or guitar. I don't know if I'd say in that order, but I like the function of those two instruments so much, and they are great for songwriting on different levels, different styles. I mean, piano is my favorite instrument, maybe over drums in concept and in life, but drums are like that was my trade, and that's my baby. But I would say piano and vocals, and then either piano or guitar as an accompaniment. But piano is the instrument you can really compose anything with. And I was a piano minor in college, so I do play piano, but I'm just not seasoned professional like I am maybe with drums or other things. And I wasn't given the gift of the best pipes in the world for singing. I can hold a tune, I can sing bluegrass, I can sing harmonies, but my voice isn't that of Rufus Wainwright or a Billy Joel or an iconic, really powerhouse vocal. And so I, all my life, have envied my favorite singers. And I'm not in like a jealous, I'm ashamed I don't have that voice, but that has always been something that's drawn my ear. And I love lyrics so much that sometimes I totally ignore the drummer. I don't even know there's drums because I'm listening to the story or the song. I mean, I love Willie Nelson. He's one of my favorites because the way he sings, no one else will do it like him and should do it like him. But his songs tell you such a story, and they're just iconic. And I don't care if the drummer's playing on a shoebox or if there is a drummer, because just what he twangs on his guitar and what he sings is enough. But that's not even the technical side of the music. And in piano, I think you can cover both. You can be very expressive, but you can be very technical. And so, yeah, in a heartbeat, those are the instruments that I would do. And it's funny because even when I was in high school, I listened to Billy Joel, Ben Folds, all these different piano, Elton John. And I always pictured that's the band. Like I heard a Ben Folds tune, Ben Folds 5 song when I was in high school. And I said, this is the kind of band I'm going to play with. And one of my best friends and the people I play with all the time is a pianist, a great songwriter. And then we work heavily with singing piano players in a lot of the work I do, and a lot of dueling pianos and showcase singing piano players. And I work with a lot of vocalists. So I've sort of kind of lived vicariously through all these things that I had dreams about as a kid.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. It's interesting. You talk about the, listening to the lyrics and kind of everything else fades away as you're listening to the story. There's times when I find I do the opposite, and the lyric becomes just the melody. And sometimes I don't even remember the words per se, but that's the melody that goes through the song. And I might be listening more intently to the bass or the guitar or the drums or the interplay between those two, or those two or three or however many instruments it might be. And sometimes I find that that's where my focus goes. So it's really interesting to hear, just different perspectives on how we listen to music, as one other thing that as individuals makes us individuals is, what we listen to when we hear a piece of music.
Yeah, and I think that's the same right brain, left brain in a way, analytical versus like emotional.
Okay.
Because I know people who only go off the lyrics or the sound of the voice. They're captivated by the artist. And that's what fans are like. They come in, they can't wait to hear that artist. They can do no wrong because they're eating out of the palm of their hand because they just love that personality or that artist or that voice. And then there's the technical. As musicians, we listen to all the parts that make the whole. And we love that interplay and that counterpoint. And I have a lot of musicians I work with who have trouble because they only listen to the counterpoint and the nuance, and they're in their heads too much. And how many times do we play this one? And how many times before it does that? When does it stop? Is it loud? Is it soft? Do they think of all the technical?
Mm-hmm.
And they can't hold a conversation musically. They can't really react or adapt because they're too worried about those details. Mm-hmm. And then some of those who are flighty, emotional types who are only listening to the lyrics, they get lost in the artistry, and they sometimes can't get back to the page or to the organization. So that always paralleled for me too in music, because I totally will listen to R&B or funk and listen just the feel, and I like that, and I have no idea what the singer's saying. It just sounds good what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I know people who are one way or the other, and they do get lost, and it does relate to business for me. So it's this constant balance that really I think inspires me.
Well, and if we can kind of sum up some of the questions we've been talking about, a lot of right brain, left brain, a lot of balance, a lot of taking into consideration all the things that are happening, and I think that for me has been a great takeaway of this conversation in terms of being successful and kind of being true to both, not eliminating either one, but also trying to balance both. And I'll just use that word balance. I think is critical.
Yeah, it's tough, and success is relative too. I mean, I'm hoping that we can be more successful and do more work, and I think it's the same, like just trying to spread it out further and further and build, because it's so much fun. I mean, I don't really get tired of it at all. I love the details and I love the artistry. So if I didn't have one or the other, there would be a big void for me personally.
Right.
And the amount of work that goes into this would be really tough to justify. And I find that too. People who work with me and come in and out of our office or work on certain projects, they might burn out on one element, and they always have to remember the other one that inspires them to be there. And that's part of the conversation too that we've had in the past on keeping that burnout minimal or finding other inspiration, because it's really tough in music and in art and creativity. Like if you're tired of your work and it's a creative endeavor and it's arts, there's a real inherent problem there. Then those people can't see past all the details and the issues. They can't even get the 1 hour on stage to help justify the 23 on the job. So I have trouble sometimes motivating people with just the artistry, because that's why they did this in the first place. And I find that really tough.
Yeah. But I think, like you said, though, the artistry can be the thing that if you can maybe bring them back and say, this is really why you're doing this, and this is, you get to do this for a living, you're putting food on the table because you're performing. I have not been a professional performer musician like you have, but I would think to me that'd be really impactful, and for me it would mean a lot that this is how you're putting food on the table, and these folks are expecting, this is the first time they're seeing you, they're expecting 300% of your effort and your blood, sweat, and tears, and so not that that's the answer to everybody, but I think the people that would respond to that are some more those artistic types.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm still learning, and so I'll be picking your brain a little bit too.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, we're all still learning, and Mike, I've learned a lot today from you, and I certainly appreciate your time. I knew this was going to be a great conversation, and it certainly was. I could ask you 300 more questions, and it wouldn't be enough, but I think that's the end of our time, unfortunately. So if you have any parting words, if you want to plug your company or anything, please feel free to go ahead and do that.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. I've always wanted to sit and chat with you, and I'm sure we'll follow up on this too.
Yeah.
And all the parallels that we've been talking about in the same industry we've been working with, that passion is really what brings me to people like you. But yeah, our company's Windish Music and Productions. Our website is windishmusic.com, www.windishmusic.com. And we do live entertainment for all events, and not just musicians, just about anything you can think of to bring wow to the occasion. But I really appreciate this time with you and everything we've done, in the IAPA Expo. I meet so many great people, and all the other people you've interviewed, I've tried to watch a few of them. Some of them are my heroes as well. So I've learned a lot just from the setting up this interview.
Oh, good. That was really the idea, was to just get a conversation going between passionate professionals, and something good is going to come of that can be a resource for somebody else. So I'm glad that that's worked for you, and now you're part of it too.
Awesome.
Yeah,
I appreciate
exactly.
that.
So thank you again, Mike, for your time, and we will see you soon.
Great. Thanks.